All right, well, I'm anxious to get started. So let's dive in. Um, I'm so thrilled to welcome everyone to this very special edition of Aiming High. For those of you who don't know me, I am Megan Bernstein. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement and Communications here at Marlborough. And like I said, this is a very special Aiming High as we get ready to sort of kickstart all of our Alumni Day celebrations, which of course include celebrating our Alumni Award recipients. So before I introduce the two of them, just a couple really quick Zoom things. If you do have any questions of your own for our guests, you can put that in the Q&A box, which should appear just at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you hover over the little gray bar. It's little chat bubbles that say Q&A, and I will do my best to keep my eye on that as well as the chat for any logistical needs, but definitely if you have a question, drop that in the Q&A. And that's all for Zoom housekeeping. I think we're all kind of pros at this point. So without further ado, it is really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eraka Bath, class of 1989, who is our 2022 Woman of the Year, and Ileana Naharo, class of 2011, who is our 2022 20Y winner, 20Y award winner. And really, I am thrilled to have them both with us virtually tonight, just as an opportunity to get to know them a little more informally, kind of outside their very official bios that are on our website and that we will certainly celebrate and reiterate this weekend at Alumni Day. But I thought rather than continue to listen to me talk, I would sort of let the two of you introduce yourselves. And so I think I'll just kick it off with the question, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe not even the professional stuff, maybe some personal, silly, serious, whatever you're feeling, what makes you you. And Ileana, I'll toss that to you first.
I'm like saved. Good.
Of course, you asked the first question over to the journalist. Well, thank you so much for having me here. Welcome, everyone. So I'm Ileana Naharo. I'm class of 2011. I am the daughter of Salvadoran immigrants, born and raised in LA, but my journalism career has taken me all along I-10 with stops in Houston at the Houston Chronicle, Tampa with Tampa Bay Times, and now living here in St. Petersburg, Florida, but covering national education stories for Education Week.
Okay. So my name is Eraka Bath. I am the daughter of two Black physician activists, which definitely informs really probably my life choices in ways that I was not aware of. And I love, Ileana, that you started reflecting on positionality, because I've been trying to do that in my own work. So being the daughter of physicians, growing up in LA, also making my way to Berkeley for undergraduate, then to Howard College of Medicine, which is an HBCU for medical school, and then did my residencies and fellowships in New York City at St. Vincent's Hospital and NYU. I finally made it back to Cali, thankfully, and have been on the faculty at UCLA since 2007.
Thank you both. So you both sort of mentioned your professional careers in your introduction. And so I'm wondering if you can expand upon that a little bit and tell us a bit more about your particular or your specific field and how you chose that field for your work. And Eraka, I'll kick that to you first.
Okay, well, so I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist with forensic training, which is basically means I have training in psychiatry and the law. I also treat adults. And I work in academic medicine, which means that unlike physicians who may see patients, and that's the bulk of what they do, I'm responsible for training the next generation of physicians, both medical students, psychiatrists in training, and child and adolescent psychiatrists in training. So my roles at UCLA and also previously at NYU were, in education sphere. One of the other things that I do is research. So I work with youth who have histories of commercial sexual exploitation, histories of juvenile justice involvement and child welfare involvement. And I really try to do something called community-based participatory research, which is where you really let the lived experience of the population that you're working with dictate the terms, the delivery style of the interventions. And so all of my research, I try to partner shoulder to shoulder with people who've had the experiences and let them be experts. So some of the work I've been doing is in reproductive health and reproductive justice, because girls in juvenile justice and child welfare bear the brunt of sexually transmitted infections, unintended pregnancies. And so out of all adolescent populations, they really have some of the worst outcome, and they're disproportionately Black and Latinx. So some of my work in that area has been really sort of meaningful to me, and sort of ties in trauma, substance use, as well as the physical health.
And so I guess right now at Education Week, I cover K-12 schools, but in particular, I focus on race and opportunity and sort of trying to address the question of how to best serve the needs of the student body across the country when we know that, statistically speaking, now the majority of students in K-12 public schools in the US are Black or Latinx or students of color. And the majority of the teacher workforce is white. And so we are in an educational system that in many ways wasn't designed with students of color in mind as the primary beneficiary, as the primary client, if you will, of this service. And so my work sort of explores culturally responsive teaching. It has dabbled into the national headlines right now of critical race theory and sort of identity questions and how certain identities are discussed or not in K-12 schools, how certain identities are validated or invalidated in a lot of public school systems. And that work stems from really my whole mission as a journalist. So I grew up in a neighborhood in Los Angeles off of Santa Monica Boulevard and Western, where my neighbors were all Central American immigrants like my parents. And I grew up knowing that the news that we consumed was mainly Univision or Telemundo, not only because of the language barrier in some cases of my community, but also because I couldn't see the stories of my neighborhood in mainstream news, right? And there's still, there's a very deeply researched history about sort of the exclusion or the stereotypical coverage of communities of color in mainstream news. And I saw it as an opportunity for me as a passionate storyteller to use my passion in the news industry to try to cover these nuanced stories and these other perspectives that have oftentimes been put onto the sidelines. And right now I'm specifically doing that in the context of education news coverage. So that's a little bit about why I do what I do and why I'm interested in it.
Thank you both. You both are doing such important work and meaningful work. And I'm curious if you could each share, Ileana, well, you both really touched on this, but I imagine people are not in your respective fields caring so deeply about that work without having a real passion for it. And so how did you find your way sort of taking your lived experiences and your interests and how did you kind of take all those things and then find your way into the fields that you're in now? Oh, sorry, Eraka, we can go back to you first.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, so I think my training in child and adolescent psychiatry and psychiatry in the law, my first job after finishing my fellowships was working in a child welfare crisis center. So I trained at NYU Hospital Bellevue, which is one of the oldest psychiatric hospitals in the country, is the community hospital and one of the teaching hospitals for Bellevue. And so right next door to Bellevue was the children's shelter. So this was a shelter where, ran 24/7, 365. And when kids are removed from their homes due to abuse or neglect, and these are babies up to 22-year-olds, they would go to the shelter until it was able to be figured out where they should go. And it was determined that it would be really helpful to have a mental health team there to decrease trauma for the youth themselves, to help with the placements. And so that was one of my first jobs as like a grown-up doctor. And I saw just the nexus of systemic racism, some of the school failures that Ileana's talking about in terms of the gaps, particularly how it fails the most vulnerable, and the sort of cycle of systems involvement. So being in child welfare, many of those youth ended up being also in the juvenile justice system. And so that to me, I think sparked this aha moment of wanting to actually intervene more structurally and upstream. And so really, I think pushed me to actually moving more into research as part of my career, because I wanted to impact more population health. So it's important as a physician to take care of people one patient at a time. But what if you can make observations and generate science and ideas that can change policy, and then you can really have a bigger impact? And some of the things that I was seeing were really more structural and systemic. And so the type of brain I have, it was really hard to be satisfied with just, I don't know, just working on the person in front of me. I wanted to sort of intervene at different stages. And then when I was recruited to UCLA, I became the consulting psychiatrist to Los Angeles County Juvenile Mental Health Court. So basically it's a court within the juvenile delinquency system that focuses on mental health particularly. And so it's very similar work, and, started to do more research there for that population who has several of the same needs. And really, oftentimes Black and Latinx youth, particularly those who are under-resourced, are accessing mental health care through these systems, as opposed to coming to UCLA on Westwood Boulevard. They're accessing it either through schools that are broken or through child welfare and juvenile justice.
Oh, that's great to hear, how you sort of were finding these different points to, grow from figuring out what research you wanted to look into, and sort of the opportunities to find these solutions and these better, better ways for folks to help them. But I guess in my case, so my first full-time journalism job was in Houston after a series of internships. I was very fortunate to have interned right before graduating from Stanford, and right after was able to internship at the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. So that was a great, firsthand lesson in terms of, the daily grind with national audiences in mind. But then in Houston, I was hired as sort of a general business reporter. And the thing is that the way business coverage was run in Houston, being a major energy city, you were focusing a lot more on sort of C-suite coverage, right, of corporations. And I saw an issue with that. I'm the person that is always bringing up the question of, well, have y'all ever thought maybe we could do it a different way? For better or for worse, I always bring up the question of, I feel like there's always something else we could be doing. And in that case, I wanted to cover business from the perspective of small business owners in Houston that made up a significant portion of the local economy. And a good portion of them were also immigrants from all over the world, with Houston being such an international hub. So I sort of took it upon myself to start reaching out to organizations and to individuals that hadn't really been approached before in such a consistent and deliberate way. And that's how I developed a beat, not only focusing on small business entrepreneurship, but also focusing on the intersection between immigration laws and business, with many workers in Houston actually being in Houston on a visa for work, right? That sort of helped me explore the coverage and the intersection of race and labor, because I was always curious about how one's identity, which can be comprised of your racial or ethnic background, can be comprised of your gender, can be comprised of your faith, all aspects of your identity, how that in many ways can determine how you interact with pre-established systems, whether it is business, whether it is labor laws, whether it is education, or as in the case in Tampa, when I moved there, intersection with military service and sort of understanding how a predominant number of our service members come from sort of under-resourced and Black and Brown communities, but you're not seeing that level of representation in high-ranking officials within the Defense Department, right? So I've always sort of wanted to question how different identities interact within different systems. And from there, Education Week came knocking, sort of asking, hey, do you want to do the same thing, but when it comes to education, and thinking about how one's racial identity and other aspects of identity can determine a lot of times how you're going to interact with the education system, and what are efforts underway to prevent your racial identity and other aspects of your culture from being a predictor. So instead, it really is equitable, where everyone's starting at the same starting line with all the same resources at whatever level they need to be able to see what happens next, as opposed to where oftentimes is the case that predictors can determine whether you will have access to opportunities or not.
Thank you both so much. I'm curious, hearing you talk about your work, how do you find ways to ensure that you have a work-life balance and the ability to sort of have time for yourself and recharge in order to do your work? Ileana, if you want to go first.
That is one interesting question for a journalist, considering that the news cycle is very much 24/7. And I think, well, that's one of the exciting parts of my job as a journalist, is that I have an idea more or less of what I'm getting into each and every day, but it's also a bit of a surprise as to what new story idea is going to emerge from a conversation with a source, from news that we're hearing of local outlets that we realize, oh, there's a national angle here. So that keeps me on my toes, and I'm very much excited about that. But I think over time, I've sort of developed the need to be more deliberate about trying not to answer that many emails when I'm actually on vacation, because burnout is very much a real thing. And especially, I think the last few years of the pandemic, where there was just a constant need for figuring out what is really going on, and especially in schools, for instance, trying to keep track of shifting schedules, of closures, of remote learning, of virtual, et cetera. It's been sort of a necessity to be very deliberate and say, all right, I turn my story in, I have to go make dinner. If there's a message, just schedule it on Slack so I can see it tomorrow morning. I don't want to see it tonight, because it is very important to be able to take care of yourself in the pursuit of knowledge and in the pursuit of this important work that we're doing.
So yeah, ditto to everything that you just said. I think there's an expression like the struggle is real, and I say the juggle is real also, as a working mother as well. And Audre Lorde described, she's a Black feminist poet, that self-care is a radical act. And it is so important for women, working women, to do that, because many times we could just keep going. I have enough work that I could like not sleep for like a year probably, and I still wouldn't get it done. And so it's really going to be up to me to have the discipline and then the self love to just put in guardrails and boundaries. And I don't think that I always succeed at doing that, because sometimes oftentimes I'm very excited and passionate about what I do. And so you can like sort of lean in so much that you just, fall into the abyss of like never taking a break. But I do think that mothering helps me shift perspective and have more reality testing that's not just about the job. And then also just I just turned 50 actually in February. And I feel like part of that epiphany, aha moment, was to really try to create joy and recreation. And so now I'm going to be trying to live for pleasure. I read someone was like, I'm going to make a to don't list. And so all the things I'm not going to do, I'm going to learn to flex the no muscle and say no to things. It's really hard. I think women in general are sort of the socialization of being a female is that we're kind of raised to say yes to a lot of things and do more. And then also in our careers, we have to be better. And so we're used to doing more in a lot of different ways. And so just trying to dial back on that and realize that I'm enough, you know.
You are more than enough. Oh, and we have dogs. The joys of Zoom.
They just gave like an amen. Like
yeah, exactly. So if I can take it back a bit to your time at Marlborough, what types of things were you involved in as a student here? And looking back on that time, are you sort of surprised at all with where you've ended up, or were those the types of things that you sort of gravitated towards when you were here at school? Eraka, I'll let you go first.
Okay. So at Marlborough, I was involved in student government. I was student body president, but I don't think I was the expected choice. And I think that they were, because I was a little bit of a rascallion, a little rebellious, but I think I had hearts and minds of the people, so I won. And I tried to like abolish saddle shoes and do all these different initiatives. But I think the leadership quality is something that has stuck. And I really credit Marlborough for, you know, having that, you know, like facilitating that ability within, and how I've taken that with me in different spaces. Also, I was involved in the Ultraviolet, the newspaper, and I enjoyed writing. So writing was really a passion. I felt like Marlborough really was the right place to nurture that type of creativity. And so that's something, you know, writing is a big part of my job as an academic. I write papers, grants, give talks. And so I think both of those skills were there. And then I was like in the dark room doing photography, listening to The Cure, very 80s. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the shout out to the Ultraviolet, because that's
Yes.
where my journalism career really started. With the journalism elective, that's where I learned everything from the lead nut graph, the reporting ethics, the whole process of sort of putting together a newspaper. And so that was one of my most cherished student activities at Marlborough, of being a writer and an editor, sometimes emergency photographer for the Ultraviolet, as well as sort of mentoring those working on the M for the middle school paper. I also very much remember being a Violet Key, if I'm remembering the group correctly, where like sometimes I would help sort of give a tour for prospective families to the school. So that was always great to sort of be able to talk about my own experiences there and answer a lot of questions. One of my favorite classes, honestly, it has nothing to do with my career or my life thus far, but I'm never going to forget fight choreography. It was sort of stage fight choreography, part of sort of drama classes. And it was the coolest thing ever, because I got to wield a sword. Was it a prop? Yes, but it was still great to take part of that. I felt like I was living out all of the fantasy adventure stories that I loved reading growing up. So those are some of my fond memories from back in the day.
Oh, that's great. And that sort of tees us up beautifully for a question that actually came into the Q&A box, which is, did you have a favorite teacher while you were at school, and who was that, and why do they make it to the top of your list?
I love Dr. Langdon, who was, people know him as Doc, and it depends on the generation. I don't know our spread on our Zoom, but he was amazing. He had, you know, a room full of hats. He gave everyone funny nicknames. And he was just animated. And that's where I think was one of the first educators that I had that was so dynamic, that was sort of embodying his, you know, the lessons. And so he would act out different parts of ancient history. And he really made something that could have been so boring and tedious with like writing out the chronology charts, just an absolute joy that we would end up geeking out on it because he made it so fun. And then I also have to give a shout out to Madame Shores, Claudette Shores, who is my French teacher. And she, I think, like just saw me didn't sort of squelch the teen spirit of being a little rascally, but sort of, met me at my level in a lot of different ways and then helped amplify. And so I felt like both of them were examples of faculty who are flexible and not sort of only wanting one type of student, which was very different when I was a student, like in the 80s, how pedagogy and how student teacher dynamics are. Now I feel like the students practically run the school. I'm just joking, but it's a lot different. You have to be a lot more tolerant of different learning styles. So.
Oh God, this is hard. Because I think I fondly remember teachers for different reasons. So it's hard to pick one that like fully stands out, because when you ask that question, like a flurry of names and faces just ran across. I think, so for instance, gotta give a shout out to Dr. Reinholtz, because he was the one that introduced me to Don Quixote, which is still my favorite novel. It's the only book that I've read more than 5 times. And I got to study it first and read it first in his class. So that was definitely a very important moment in my life. I have to give a shout out to Ms. Lewis, who was one of my advisors for the Ultraviolet, helping me sort of pursue a career in journalism. Got to give a shout out to Dr. Ortiz with honors research as a course, and sort of introducing me to the idea that I think that course gave me the most confidence that I was ready for higher education, and I was ready for the academic rigor that I was going to face at Stanford. So I very much appreciated that much needed boost to my confidence. I appreciate Ms. Cope for making me realize and cement that writing in general is very much my passion, and that storytelling has power. So I, will forever be grateful for having a teacher that can open my eyes to that immense responsibility that you carry as a storyteller, right? The list can go on and on, actually, of sort of the different ways that teachers at Marlborough helped shape who I am. And I think that's one of the things that I took away from Marlborough, that in many ways, many teachers at Marlborough helped me come into terms of who I am, what I want out of life, and that I very much belonged at Marlborough and deserved to be there and deserved the shot that I got from being able to attend that school. And I think, thinking back to being able to work with these teachers, the other thing that I very much appreciate, and this is why I want to say this, sort of all the teachers that I had who were supportive of me when I was at Marlborough, because unfortunately, when I was in my sophomore year of Marlborough, my mother passed away. And that was very difficult to navigate. And I remember being very much concerned about, but my grades and everything and all the plans that I had, well, what do I do now? And so I very much appreciate all the teachers that came together to be able to give me grace, which I very much needed at that time, but also not give up on me and continue to challenge me to be my very best. And that is a number of faculty members that were there at Marlborough at that time that I very much, to this day, am forever grateful for that support.
That was so well said. I almost don't even want to say anything after it, but I hope I sort of started jotting down some of the names of folks who are still here, and I'm going to send you all their information, because I think it's like the best thing a teacher could hear, and to hear that a student or a former student is really thriving out in the world, I think is one of the best things a teacher can hear about their time as an educator. If you could go back sort of take your present self back to your first day of Marlborough and meet that version of you, what would you share with her as she sort of started that journey?
I think I would tell past me, it's gonna be okay. I would tell her that that girl named Sarah is very much gonna be a lifelong friend. And I would tell her that have a little bit more faith in yourself, because again, it's gonna be okay. It's not as daunting as you think. You're gonna be fine.
I would, I felt like when I was a student at Marlborough, there were a lot of boxes that you had to fit in. And there was a lot of othering when you didn't fit in those boxes. And even though my temperament and personality style, I think because I'm an only child, I'm good at making friends and was friends with different groups and able to navigate them differently. It was still hard. I think being one of like 5 Black students, and at the time, and like who you're going to go to the dance with, those sort of choices were different. Being like a Black girl at a predominantly white school, with the brother schools, etc. However, I feel like it's okay to be a late bloomer. Like I wasn't, valedictorian or, I remember Mrs. Prague, and this is a shout out to her. She was my chemistry teacher. And she gave me a C- on a test. I earned a C- on a test, but she put minuses all over the page. And I think she was really saying, look, you can do better. But it was this notion of pushing to be your best self. And then also being okay, like when you're 14, 15, you don't have to be knocking it out of the park. I think that that's such a pressure on youth now. And like, if I was sort of batting on all cylinders at that age, would I have had the energy to like be, boss like now? Probably not, right? I look at other people's careers versus mine and like I did okay. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's also okay, like slow and steady wins the race. Obviously some people like our valedictorian, Linda Lai, shout out to her. She's like I think on the California Supreme Court. So besides Linda, like you don't have to like work yourself to death when you're young, and it's important to have joy on the journey, and so those are some of the things I think I would say to my younger self: to be patient. Like it's not most important to be most popular or to have like the boyfriend first, or some of the like stupid things that seem critical when you're like trying to fit in those environments. So I'm like so glad that I'm on this path.
Great advice. I'm going to have you come speak to our students next and remind them all of those things. How has mentorship played a role in your life, either personal or professional mentorship? And could you share a little bit about that? And Eraka, maybe you could start.
Sure. I would say mentorship has been really pivotal to my, professional development and career trajectory. And I have a lot of mentors. It takes a village. It's a team sport. And so I mentor others as well. And I mean, I have multiple mentors depending on what it is. So I have mentors for my research. I have mentors who help me, navigate work-life balance. I have, I'd say like racial ethnic mentoring, because it's hard being, a Black woman in academia, only 4% of physicians are Black, 4.5% Latino in this country. And so oftentimes, if you are working in academic medicine, you're one of the only in your department or setting. And so it's helpful to have racially concordant mentoring to talk about navigating visible and invisible barriers to success. There's a lot of mentors who are peer mentors, so we mentor each other. Definitely being a woman in academic medicine, and women, just women are underrepresented in academic medicine. Like I participate in a lot of team science, so women, we put each other on each other's papers. We really try to lift as we climb and really stay connected. So all those, most of my mentors are women. I'd say there's 2 dudes total. And so that's also important. I think that's me valuing the sisterhood of my Marlborough experience, and also recognizing how many of the women who I work with are also navigating, the same type of juggling. So juggling, parenting, and juggling professional demands, and juggling imposter syndrome, and how to sort of, persevere as there's maybe people not thinking that you're supposed to be in the different spaces that you are. So I feel that mentoring, is really critical. And I encourage people to not just have one, and they don't have to be older than you, you know what I mean? And to also, Maya Angelou says, if you get, give, and if you learn, teach. And so I try to have that be kind of my ethos in terms of how I, interact with others. And I'm blessed in the sense that so many people come to me for advice, and I try to be generous with my time,
I'm glad that you mentioned the idea that a mentor doesn't just have to be somebody who's older than you, because I definitely have peer mentors across journalism as we try to navigate, again, very much a male-dominated, white-dominated profession and space. Although I have been very blessed to have older Latinas to be my mentors, including one who has actually been on a masthead, essentially sort of top leadership in newsrooms. Maria Carrillo has been just an absolute blessing in my life to have somebody, well, because first off, that was the first time that I had ever seen a Latina as an editor, period, not just in terms of that level in a newsroom. And it sort of helped present to me even more concretely the idea that, okay, so if I do want to pursue a leadership role in the newsroom in this capacity, it has been done. It is possible. There is somebody who can show me how to do that and what they had to go through. And I think mentorship is incredibly valuable because to Eraka's point, it's not just mentorship for your career, right? But it's also guidance just through life, honestly, to have multiple voices in your corner that you can turn to get different perspectives about how to navigate this crazy journey that we're all on. And especially, the women in my life that serve as my mentors, I'm very much grateful to them because in my case, it's also this sort of innate need to find almost a surrogate mother, right? Having lost mine at such a young age, it's been very difficult to navigate womanhood when you're 15 and the main woman in your life is not there. So I very much am grateful to the women in my life that have helped shape my career in terms of opening doors for me and getting me to think about greater possibilities for my life, but also just for being there, right? To help acknowledge some of the trials and tribulations that can come from navigating newsrooms when you are not a heterosexual white male. So I very much appreciate that help and guidance from women in my life. And I think to anyone who's been sort of considering, well, do you really need a mentor? Not necessarily, it's not a need, but trust me when I say it's going to be a lot harder if you don't cultivate those relationships of folks who look out for you and and who can help answer a lot of questions and provide that advice that is so critical sometimes when you can get lost in your own head and feeling as though, well, that's it, there's no way to get out of this.
Can I add also to what Ileana said about like people who are opening doors? Because that's so important, and like keeping the door open with, you know, doorstop or piano or whatever. Because that's, you know, there's this notion, at least in the academic medical literature, of sponsorship. Because you not only need mentors, but you need people who will sponsor and champion your career, who will amplify your success, who will say your name in different spaces, so that, you know, that's almost sort of validated networking on your behalf. And so there are people like that, and it probably depends on your career type, but most careers are relational in nature. And so I, you know, whether it's in the music or the arts or you know, literature, medicine, law, networking, and social skills, and having sponsors are also really critical.
Thank you. Yeah, that's such a good point. And it's really powerful to hear how, you know, I think sometimes people think of mentorship as this sort of one person, this pillar who's sort of doing all these things for you, or enabling you to do all these things. And I loved hearing you both speak about the many mentors in your life and how they kind of each fill maybe a different role and a different each have this very meaningful place in your trajectory, which is so nice to hear. Outside of sort of your professional life, this is sort of hopefully a little lighter, fun question. What are some of your, should you have any free time, which I don't think either of you do, but do you have any hobbies or interests or skills or sort of fun outside of work things that are your passions?
I enjoy cooking. I think I am a foodie, and I can throw down in the kitchen. I'm really good at making different dishes, and I really enjoy, like, I believe that community is the cure. And so to the extent that I can leverage the fact that I have a home and that I can cook and provide, I love having friends over for dinner parties or brunch or whatever. So that's like a hobby, is just like hanging out with friends and my daughter's friends, and the parents of her friends. And I like exercise. I like playing tennis. I like going on walks. I like my Peloton. But I like just different types of fitness as part of like the self-care road. And music. I love music. I feel like there's hip hop has many answers, including around mentoring, because everyone needs a hype girl or hype guy. Sorry. Anytime I can shout out to hip hop, I try.
Well, you briefly heard my little furry dog Toto earlier in this conversation, and thanks to Toto, I go on a lot more walks now, particularly out to parks. There's a park here that has a beautiful lake, and so I love being able to go around there and just, especially during the pandemic, the parks were such a necessity to be able to safely leave the house and just breathe in actual fresh air, right? So very much enjoy that in, again, whatever free time exists. I've been trying to be more diligent of creating free time, but the news cycle has its demands. And I like to say it's two different hobbies. I love to read books, but then I also love to buy them. So they're two very different hobbies, all right? As I like to explain to my dad whenever he says, but you haven't even read the last 3 that you bought. No, because that's the other hobby. that's a separate hobby. Reading has its pace, and then buying has a different pace. So definitely spend some time with that. And just like Eraka said, also just spending time with friends, going out to new places. In the different cities that I've lived, I always sort of make my bucket list of different activities, restaurants, theaters, or other places to visit and patron. And so of course I have that for St. Petersburg and Tampa as well. And so I always take those opportunities to either go exploring on my own, or if our friends are free, be able to go with them for a new experience that we can share. So love being able to do that.
That's great. I need both of you to like tell me all the good places to eat and see, and then we'll have a dinner party at Eraka's.
Absolutely.
And so, of course, I feel you both are so accomplished. These awards sort of feel like just yet another bullet point on your incredible resumes. But I did want to sort of ask, what did, and this came into the Q&A box as well, what did receiving, or what does receiving this award for each of you, your respective awards, mean to you in the scheme of your Marlborough career, the Marlborough community, and maybe your life as a whole?
I mean, it's so special, and to be seen, and to be recognized for achievements. I mentioned this at a alumni board meeting, that so many times in navigating the different spaces I'm in, there's this sort of hyper visibility and invisibility. And so not, even though, yeah, I've achieved a lot on my CV, but getting awards are, different and special. And this is, people who've known me when I was, very, 11 years old, I started at Marlborough. And so to be recognized and to have my achievements be validated by a different audience, where it's not, the same sort of, it's not like a peer-reviewed publication. It has different sort of meaning, especially the women who've gotten this award and what it means to the school. So it's very special.
Kind of echoing what Eraka said, I think there's something to be said about being recognized for the work that you do. That can sometimes feel as though you're chugging along, you're passionate about what you're doing, but people may or may not know, right? Even though I'm the kind of person that would always prefer my work to be known more so than myself, because I put a lot of work into my stories and hope that it can lead to change that is needed. That being said, it's definitely an honor to be recognized with the 20Y award, especially because I think my very initial reaction was, are you sure? Are you sure about that? Because I still feel there are those moments, and I think this happens when you're a young professional, that you have this question of, but have I really done enough? Am I somehow falling behind? Even though you're barely starting in your career, but there's this sentiment, right? It kind of speaks to what Eraka had mentioned before, this sort of pressure of having to perform at your absolute best all the time, and that you're supposed to be at a certain stage in your career, in your life, at a certain age, even though we know that's not how life actually works, right? In the grand scheme of things. But I think it's very much an honor. I very much appreciate the recognition. And for me, it's very special because Marlborough was a school that I remember when I got the news that I got accepted. I was so excited because I had done the open house, and I remember telling my parents, they have an enormous library. Like, my middle school at the time barely had like a closet of books. And so I was like, oh my God, I felt like Belle in the Beauty and the Beast library of all the books there. But I also knew that if I didn't get a scholarship, I wasn't going to attend Marlborough. I think at that time, the school tuition was more than what my parents made in a full year. And so I was very close to not going to Marlborough. In fact, I had already paid my enrollment fee for a private Catholic school when the mailman came late in the day in a flurry saying, I'm so sorry, I forgot to deliver this earlier today. And it was the acceptance to the full ride scholarship for Marlborough. I never got those $100 back from the enrollment fee, but I think it was worth it. I think you know, it was fine. I'm not holding a grudge on that. And so I think in many ways, Marlborough felt, you know, we talk about when you're applying to colleges, your reach schools, right? Marlborough as a high school felt like a reach school to me, because I knew that this was a world with resources that my family and my neighborhood did not normally have access to, right? So the opportunity to be able to attend Marlborough, I understood, was very huge, because it was going to start me on a path to a life that was very different from the life of my parents, who came into this country in the 80s fleeing a civil war. So, you know, Marlborough was in many ways a personal challenge to navigate that world, to navigate, you know, pushing myself to what I could be when I knew that perhaps my parents couldn't always offer that guidance for how do you act at a networking event? How do you handle all that? That wasn't something that my parents were used to. That wasn't, you know, part of their culture, and it wasn't part of their professional sphere. But I always pushed myself to think, no, you're gonna make it. You got accepted for a reason. All right, you'd have a right to be here. And I think it sort of helped open my eyes to the idea of, man, wouldn't it be amazing if this quality of education was accessible to more students across Los Angeles and across the country? Just how much farther could other girls go if they had access to this type of education? And so I'm never going to forget that. I'm never going to forget the impact that had on me, and the way that it helped shape my worldview of haves and have-nots, of access and opportunity. You know, Marlborough did in many ways open a lot of doors for me that otherwise may not have opened. So to then be recognized years later for the work that I'm doing that really did jumpstart at Marlborough, I think, you know, it's one of these moments where I can look back and say, this is actually kind of a big deal. So, you know, I do want to say thank you for the nomination, for the selection. And this is just the beginning.
Can I add also about like just I think the significance of the award, because I think other candidates or winners, awardees, honorees, like don't necessarily have the type of bios or histories that we have. And so I think I really appreciate and am grateful and thankful for just having an inclusive lens about what sort of matters and what counts. And I think the type of careers that both Ileana and I have had are really, you know, can be inspirational to girls. And I'm glad that that's also being recognized and celebrated by the community, so that we can, you know, continue to have impact in that way. So it feels special on that angle as well, because I think when I was a student, I don't think the Women of the Year who were selected had a similar, you know, profile as I do, or as Ileana does. And so I think that sort of, you know, inclusive excellence shift in framing is really amazing.
Well, I think, I hope, and I assume that everyone here tonight listening to this conversation, it's very clear why you are being honored, and it is truly such a privilege to get to honor the two of you and your incredible careers. And like Ileana said, I know there's so much more to come from both of you, and I just look forward to watching all of that and all that is to come. And that feels like just a perfect place to sort of wrap up our conversation. I want to thank you both so much for your time this evening, and for sharing so much of yourselves really with everyone here. It really was a real treat and a real privilege, like I said. And am also really looking forward to seeing you both in person on Saturday as we sort of continue your celebrations at Alumni Day this Saturday, April 23rd. Anyone who's on the call now who's celebrating a milestone reunion, I hope we will also be seeing you in person. If you haven't had the chance yet, I hope you'll register online through the Marlborough website to join us. And again, continue the celebrations of the Woman of the Year and the 20Y Award winner. And I think that is all we have for this evening. So again, thank you, Eraka and Ileana. This was really such a treat to get to speak with you both and hear so much about yourselves. And we will see you at Alumni Day.
Thank you. Yeah.